A housing law can change the market without lowering a single mortgage rate. That is the first thing to understand about what just happened in Washington this week. Congress just passed the biggest housing bill in 30 years. And almost nobody is explaining what it actually does, not what politicians are claiming it does, not what headlines are calling it, what it actually does. Because those are three very different things. And the gap between them is the entire story. At exactly midnight on July 11, 2026, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act became law, without the president's signature, through a constitutional provision that has existed since the founding of the country. The Senate passed it 85-5. The House passed it 358-32. Those are not normal numbers in 2026. Both parties agreed housing was broken enough to actually do something. That alone is significant. Now here is the context that explains why this bill happened at all. The median existing home just hit a new all-time high of $440,600. A family needs an income of about $117,000 a year to afford the typical home on the market. The median U.S. household earns around $80,000. That gap is almost $30,000 wide. A household earning $75,000 a year can afford fewer than 1 in 4 homes currently listed for sale. The country is short by more than 4 million housing units. Mortgage rates are sitting near 6.5%. That is the housing market this bill was written to address. Now let us look at what it actually contains. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what changed, what it cannot change, and what happens next. The crazy part is that this bill does not write a massive check. It removes friction. And there is a big difference. The biggest problem in American housing is not that people lack the desire to buy. It is that not enough homes exist. The U.S. has been underbuilding for 2 decades. After the 2008 financial crisis, home builders pulled back. They never fully came back. Add tariffs, rising construction costs, and local zoning rules that make new housing difficult to approve. When supply is short and demand is strong, prices do not stabilize, they climb. That is what has been happening. The ROAD Act tries to attack that supply problem directly. Here is how. First, streamlined environmental reviews. One of the biggest delays in housing construction is the federal review process. A single review under the National Environmental Policy Act can add months or years to a project timeline. The new law expands what are called categorical exclusions, projects that can skip the full review entirely. Building a house between 2 buildings that were already reviewed, you may now be able to skip the review. That sounds small. For a developer trying to build 50 homes in a neighborhood, it can be the difference between viable and not viable. But speed is useful only when the underlying review remains competent. Cutting time does not automatically mean cutting corners. The quality of what gets built still depends on local oversight. The law changes the timeline, not the standards. Second, the Innovation Fund. The law creates a $200 million annual competitive grant program. Local governments that demonstrate measurable increases in housing supply can apply for these funds. Streamlined permitting, density bonuses, zoning changes. The federal government is now paying communities to build more housing. That is a new incentive that did not exist before this law. Whether enough communities respond is the question. Third, manufactured homes. This one is underreported but may matter more than most provisions in this bill. For 50 years, federal law required manufactured homes to be built on a permanent chassis, a steel frame with wheels. Most manufactured homes never move once they are installed. That chassis adds cost and limits design options. The new law eliminates the chassis requirement. That single change could reduce each manufactured home's cost by $5,000 to $10,000. Manufactured homes are already significantly cheaper than traditionally built homes. Making them cheaper still matters enormously. For first-time buyers, rural families, and retirees priced out of the traditional market, this may be the clearest affordability path in the bill. Fourth, commercial to residential conversions. The law creates a pilot grant program. Local governments can apply for funding to convert vacant commercial or industrial buildings into affordable housing. With office vacancy rates still elevated in many cities, this provision could create a pipeline of new units from existing structures. Fifth, small dollar mortgages. The law creates a program to make mortgages under $100,000 more accessible. These loans are often unprofitable for lenders, so they do not make them. Lower-cost homes in smaller markets go untouched. Expanding access to small-dollar mortgages could unlock homeownership in a category that currently has almost no financing pathway. Sixth, FHA loan limits. The law raises maximum loan amounts for FHA-backed mortgages and ties them to automatic annual adjustments. Buyers in high-cost markets will no longer keep hitting a ceiling every time home prices rise. Now here's the most controversial part of the law, and the one with the most complicated real-world outcome: the institutional investor restriction. Large institutional investors, those owning 350 or more single-family homes, are now prohibited from buying more. They are also required to sell to individual buyers within 7 years. Renters in those properties get a right of first refusal, misses a 30-day window before the home can be sold to anyone else. That sounds powerful, and politically it landed well. But the economics are more complicated. Large institutional investors own a much smaller share of the single-family market than most people believe. The vast majority of investor-owned homes belong to mom-and-pop landlords who own fewer than 10 properties. This law does not touch them, and many large investors were already retreating from the single-family market before this law passed. The chief economist of Redfin said the ban would likely shift purchases from large corporations to medium and small corporations, without a noticeable impact on the overall dynamics of the housing market. So this provision may make buyers feel better, without dramatically changing inventory in most markets. That is not a reason to oppose it. It is a reason to understand it clearly before expecting results. Now here is the section of the law that most coverage is skipping entirely: rural renters. An estimated 400,000 rural families were at risk of being displaced. When USDA-financed property owners paid off their mortgages, they could convert those properties to market-rate housing. The new law separates rental assistance from those loan maturities, protecting those families from losing their homes. That is 400,000 families, real people. A provision buried in a bill most headlines covered in 3 bullet points. Now here's the honest part. The part most coverage is skipping for a different reason. This law does not lower your mortgage rate. Congress does not control mortgage rates. This law does not reduce home prices next month or next year. New construction from start to market can take longer than an elected official's entire term in office. The Urban Institute identified 35 different programs that HUD now has to implement, at a time when the agency is short-staffed and has not received additional funding to carry out the work. One economist described this bill as a toolbox, not a miracle. More about improving the system's odds than watching your payment drop by October. That is the honest framing. And it matters because millions of people are hoping this fixes housing in months. It will not. The timeline for meaningful supply increases is years, not months. And most of what this law does happens at the local level, through communities deciding to take up the grants and incentives. A community that does not change its zoning laws will not see new housing just because a federal grant exists. The federal law creates opportunity. Local governments decide whether to take it. So who does this law actually help and when? Buyers competing against large institutional investors may see slightly less competition over time in affected markets. Renters in institutional-owned homes now have rights of first refusal when those properties are sold. That is new protection. First-time buyers in lower-cost markets may gain better access to small-dollar mortgages they currently cannot get financed. Buyers in high-cost markets may benefit from FHA loan limits that better match actual home prices. Rural families and lower-income buyers may gain access to cheaper manufactured housing as construction costs drop. Communities that actively reform their zoning and permitting may receive federal funding that accelerates new construction. And 400,000 rural renters may keep their homes instead of being displaced when USDA loans mature. None of those outcomes happen immediately. All of them depend on implementation, and implementation takes time. Here is the systems-level reality. The housing affordability crisis has 2 root causes. The root cause this law addresses: not enough homes exist. The law tries to make building easier and cheaper. The root cause this law does not address: mortgage rates. Rates are still near 6.5%. That is a Federal Reserve decision, not a congressional one. At 6.5% on a $440,000 home with 20% down, your monthly payment is approximately $2,225. That payment does not change because of this law. The supply of homes competing for your purchase might eventually improve. Your specific payment today does not move. That is why one senator who voted for the bill said, "Congress has finally stopped sitting by, finally stopped saying, 'Damn, the price of housing sure has gone up,' and actually done something." For 30 years, the federal government mostly watched. This law is a first step. Whether it becomes a real step depends on what happens next, at the agency level, the local level, and in future legislation. The housing affordability crisis did not build in 1 year. It will not get solved in one bill. But for the first time in a generation, the federal government has a framework, not just complaints. What that framework produces over the next 5 to 10 years is the question that will actually matter. The answer will be written not in Washington but in the permitting offices and zoning boards of thousands of American communities. Drop one word in the comments, framework, because that is what this law actually is. Keep thinking. Stick